Okay, let's start looking at adding some enemies to this project. So I've just quickly created 3 enemy materials. Just some basic colors for now until I find a graphic that I want to use. So let's set up an enemy object. So let's create a sphere, call it enemy, and zero out its position. Now with everything else I've been using a graphic object. So let's duplicate that and let's just call it enemy graphic and remove the collider. Okay, make that a child of the enemy. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have the enemy randomly choose its material each time. So yeah, I already started creating a script. So yep, create an enemy script, because I mucked up the last video. Enemy script. Okay, we'll do the same thing similar to the player. Let's create a variable called enemy graphic of type transform, and the same at the start. If there is no enemy graphic object, let's find it on the transform. Enemy graphic equals transform dot find enemy graphic with a capital E, wasn't it? Enemy graphic dot transform. Okay, and I had 3 materials there, so I'm going to create an array just to make it easier. Enemy material of type material, and this is going to be an array of materials. Now these have to be assigned in the inspector, otherwise it will break. So I could check that if any material dot length is equal to 0, it's going to do a debug dot log error. Enemy has no materials in the inspector. So let's just even test that out. So on the enemy, give it the enemy script. Currently have no materials. If I hit play, I should get a log error. That's no materials. Alright, that's the best I can do to stop people breaking their projects. Okay, so we have created 3 materials. Let's just drop them into the array. 1, 2, 3 materials. Okay, now let's pick a random material and assign it. So the enemy graphic dot renderer dot material equals, we need to pick a random enemy material. Enemy material random dot range from 0 to the enemy material length. Now like I've said before, arrays count from 0, but when you use random range and you're using integers, the high end is exclusive. So if we have 3 materials in there, that'll go 0, 1, 2. So the length will return 3, but this random will only return 0, 1, or 2. So that should be A-OK. Random range. Okay, so with 3 materials assigned, if I keep hitting play, we should keep getting a random material. Nope. What's going on here? Enemy graphic. Because I've left the renderer on the main enemy object enabled. disable that. We only want the enemy graphic renderer enabled. Let's try that again. Okay, so it's a orange one, an orange one, the yellow one. Just want to see a red one. Okay, it really doesn't want to give me a yellow one, red one. I've got here material 1 is the red one, so it's not giving me an index of 0. There we go, red finally. So we got all 3 cases. We haven't had an error, so that part is working correctly. So let's create a prefab of that enemy, and then load up the level scene. So I now need to look at the level manager. Really don't need all these spaces. Now we're going to look at the enemy variables. So let's set a number of enemies that we want in the scene. Enemy count, be an integer, and equals, let's just put 4 in to start. So we need to create a function that will instantiate enemies. Now in the setup of everything we have a list, empty space list. So we could just work off what empty spaces are remaining after all the rocks are in place. So in setting up the level, we set up steel blocks, we set up the rock. No, that's just all setting up steel blocks. This is where we set up the rocks. Now we need to set up place enemies in the level. Okay, so we need a for loop, and we already have I declared there. Let's just create a new loop in case I move it to another function. For bar e type integer equals 0 while e is less than enemy count. Come on, IntelliSense. Semicolon e increment. So, how are we finding? It's the same thing as here, isn't it? Random choice. So we've already declared a local variable there. It's going to break if I do it twice. So let's go random enemy choice. Type int. It's a really bad name. Variable enemy place. Type int equals, and the same thing here. Going to pick one of the positions in the empty space list. Now that returns a vector 2. Do we have... I can see a problem where enemies are spawned too close to the player, so I want to put a consideration in for that. Well, at the moment, let's just spawn enemies anywhere, and then we'll look at making sure they don't spawn too close to the player next. So, I need a variable for the enemy. Enemies. Enemy of type transform. New enemy type transform equals instantiate enemy at the same thing here. Okay, looks like I've set up a position. Forgetting all my comments. Get a random number. Instantiate enemy at chosen position. So bar enemy pause. I don't think I've used that yet. I'll type vector 3 equals vector 3. How do we do it here? We could actually copy all this. Empty space lists, and it's not random choice, it's enemy place. Enemy place, enemy place, 0, and instantiate the enemy at the calculated enemy position and with a 0 rotation. New enemy dot name equals enemy underscore plus the dot to string. So we get an enemy and the number. Actually, that could muck up. No, I can't see a problem with that right now. We don't need to parent it. We do need to remove that position from the list. So that comes along too. And it's not part of the level array because they'll be moving. So that should be all for placing the enemies in the level. Everyone can see that. Okay, let's see if I have any errors. So on the level manager, now I need to place the enemy prefab. I'll save the scene. Now let's see if I just do instantiate some random colored spheres, 4 of them. Excellent. And all the colors will come out too. So we have 4 enemies that are distributed around the level in empty spaces. Okay, that was pretty quick and pretty easy. Let's see if I can bring up a condition where they spawn too close to the player. Okay, that time we only have 3 of them. 0, 1. Okay, so 2 have spawned on top of each other. How come that wasn't removed from the list? That's not right. Empty space. Random choice. That's why. Look, enemy place. That's what you get for copying and pasting all the time. So remove that position from the list, the enemy placement. Alright. So now if I hit it multiple times, we should keep getting... It's quite amazing that it randomly chose the same spot twice. But now absolutely we should not have that problem again. There we go, and that's what I'm talking about. They're starting to get really close to the player at the start, so we need to put in a consideration for that. We could do something basically with a vector 3 distance. So before we instantiate the enemy, we're calculating a position for the enemy to be. Let's check the enemy is not too close to the player. If and there will be an else after that. Okay, and all this will go into the else. Okay, so bar dist to player, distance to player of type float equals vector 3.distance and the enemy position that we have calculated and the player dot position. So that should return a distance between the calculated position and the player position. Now, does the player have a position? Yes, he does, before we set up a level. Okay. Enemy position, player position. If the distance to player is less than, what can we say? Let's say about 5 blocks away. Let's try 5.0. That could be too close. So if the distance is too low, then we're not going to instantiate an enemy because that's in the else. So we actually have to decrease the E count. Otherwise, we're going to get less than 4 enemies. So E minus minus, and nothing else happens for the rest of that loop. The loop will come back, and then we'll try again. So hopefully I wanted to create that into a public variable so we could test it, but let's see what happens anyway. So hopefully none of them should be parked up around within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of like a semicircle like that. He shouldn't be around any of that. 1, 2, 3. So that one's not within that range. That's worked out. Getting a little bit close, but not close enough, so that's good. Okay, so we're still getting 4 enemies every time, and none of them are getting too close to the player. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's definitely not within that 5 radius. Okay, so I think that's enough to make sure that the enemies aren't getting spawned on top of the player. Okay, so I'll break the video here, and now I will finally have a look at moving these enemies around.